following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
Etc. So you can clearly see that there's not just demand for the graph services and tools, but also it's now being used in production for a lot of applications and became a very natural and very key service to those who are building dApps.
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time.
Welcome to the GRTIQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Eugene Aseev, founder and CTO at Chainstack. In addition to being a grant recipient from the Graph Foundation, Chainstack is an infrastructure company that helps startups and enterprise customers build, run, and scale blockchain solutions. During our conversation, Eugene shares his story about entering into the crypto space, the origins behind Chainstack, and the work Chainstack provided as part of their foundation grant. Eugene also shares insight on the future of blockchain, Web3, and how the graph fits into it all. I started the conversation by asking Eugene about his background. And as a small programming note, Eugene did change his microphone about a quarter of a way through the discussion.
I've been always a technical guy, so since my childhood I've been using computers when there was dial-up. So I lived in a very small city in Russia, and my father was one of the first guys to get a computer in our city and also to connect to the internet. So it was super exciting. It all started from IRC chats, and then I read some magazines that were printed at that point of time about computer science and so on. So this led me to becoming a computer scientist, and I was studying at the technical university in Moscow, one of the top technical universities in Moscow, and learning stuff about like assembly languages and like automation and all that. So this has been always a pretty technical route for me, and basically that's where I did my higher education as well. For instance, my master's degree work was related to machine learning and automating of some stuff related to malware analysis with machine learning. So this has been always interesting to me, like intersection between computer science and automation of things that can be too routine for people to do and that can benefit the overall humanity.
So what takes somebody with an interest in computer science and technology into the crypto space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my entry to crypto was extremely awkward. It was around 2012, 2013 at that time. And I worked in a security company, and we were considering rolling out a product to protect desktop users from different malware related to Bitcoin wallet and to Bitcoin software. So basically, I was in charge of researching this topic at some point, and when I looked at it, I installed like Bitcoin software on my computer, and I played with it a little bit, and then my assumption was that it's super niche. It will never be used by a lot of people. And basically the end result was like, okay, it's too early. We probably should not look at it. And I was like, okay, this some strange digital coin. So why would anybody use it? I mean, you can use some traditional finance, and I mean, it's totally fine. So why would anybody use Bitcoin? And then I forgot about it for like, I don't know, 4 years apparently. So unfortunately for me, then I had kind of secondary entry to crypto in around 2016, I think, when Ethereum was already growing in popularity, and I worked in another software company where we thought, why not use blockchain for authenticity proofs of like files, because in this case it was data protection company. So we were considering using a blockchain as a timestamping engine, basically to show, okay, this file was created at this point of time, or this object was created at this point of time, and here you can see the proof. So we built a simple solution on top of Ethereum blockchain, and this was pretty cool. This was very interesting, and this actually brought me and the team to build Chainstack, because at this point we realized that writing like Ethereum node, or at that point there were a few very popular clients like Parity and Get, was really complicated. So we decided that, okay, we should do something about it, and probably there will be a lot of people willing to build solutions on top of this, and they will be struggling with running a node, making up to sync all the time. So since then, I've been pretty much 100% in crypto space, and also learned a lot since then, of course, and started to use a lot of applications here. So currently, probably more than 100% in this, like more like 120, I think.
So I'd be curious then, with your background in computer science and your interest in not only the technical industry, but making your way into crypto, how do you describe crypto and blockchain to people that are non-technical, maybe family or friends that don't understand it?
Yeah, so I tend to describe crypto nowadays in use case terms. So I try to explain what they can use today and how they can leverage it today. And it seems to be working. So for instance, I explain them DeFi, not like DeFi. I explain them, okay, guys, so you go to bank, you get a loan, and this is conditions for the loan that you generally get in the bank. So now you can basically go and take a loan without going to the bank, just sitting behind your computer or using some mobile application, and not being dependent on KYC processes and so on and so forth. So I try to explain by examples and by things they can actually use today, because I think that's really powerful way of explaining things. Because if you start to go into technical details, okay, you know that it's like a mutable ledger and things are like very secure there. I mean, this kind of value proposition is not really triggering a lot of people, especially those who are not really in the tech. So when you describe them like real benefits that they can actually get today out of crypto, they start to listen and they said, oh, that's interesting. Why don't I go and try? And so on and so forth. Of course, another example would be like collectibles, because collectibles is not a new idea, obviously. So now you can basically do it in a much more democratized fashion, right? So you can basically get a collectible right away. Again, you can just have a wallet and you see some cool piece of art and you can just go and buy it and bid for it, etc. So you don't need to go to London to visit Sotheby's auctions and this kind of stuff, right? So also this is a way to explain, okay, you have collectibles markets that are absolutely democratized. So you can be just some random guy with some random amount of money, and then you can just go and buy some art, and then this art can grow in price, and then basically everybody can become a collectioner, right? So this is another example that I use when I explain to just normal people like how you can leverage blockchain. So I try not to even talk about blockchain because it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I just try to explain the use cases that can trigger them to start looking into it, to start using it. So I don't really expect them to go into like a rabbit hole all the time. I just want them to be aware of the advantages of crypto over some of the existing technologies that they might be using, or existing services that they might be using. So this is my approach today to explain crypto. So I try to not to talk about technical details at all, because they don't really make any sense for most of the people, to be honest.
Well, when it comes to you personally, what is it that inspires or motivates you to work within the crypto space? And like you referenced, put in more time than you actually have. What's inspiring and motivating that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a few reasons, of course. A primary reason being the fact that this industry is developing on some sort of super high speed, especially if you are inside this industry. You see that, you read all the news, you follow like some thought leaders in the space, you read Twitter, etc. So you understand how fast it is developing. So it's very exciting. It's like space speed, if you wish, versus like you're just driving a car in other industries, right? So it's extremely quickly developing, and you can see it also by project. For instance, like I was just totally mind blown by the news from the Graph ecosystem just from last couple of weeks about like Solana support and just multi-chain support and the rest of the things. So it's moving so quickly. So that's the most exciting part of it. I think that if you're part of it, you basically follow all this movement and you basically participate in it. And like stuff like ENS, for instance, also is extremely exciting. Like how and if you think about it, like today it's just like governance token. Nobody really knows what will happen. And if you think about it in like 10 years, like it's apparently like the whole domain name system to some extent will be managed by a set of people who are like delegates and who own some stake in this and who are basically looking to improve all this technology and all this ecosystem. And this is kind of mind blowing that today it looks like a small thing still, but you are just trying to imagine how it could look like in 10 years. And it's absolutely mind blowing if you try to fantasize about it, right? The same about, generally speaking, about DAOs, right? So DAO is probably one of the most exciting directions of crypto to me as of today, because it uncovers so much different ways of doing things as an organization, as a company, as just group of people. So like these primitives that we have today and the excitement of people doing probably 2x, 3x than people are doing in other industries, just in average, because they're excited and they want to move this forward. And finally, the thing that is also very excites me, that it works, right? So it's not just a lot of hype and people are talking about it and they are like, going to conferences and they are like just posting to Twitter. In fact, this thing works. So you can go and use many things. Like when we were working with the Graph guys and we were running some infrastructure for them, I see like, the number of requests per second that are coming to our nodes, and it's incredible. I mean, it means that there's a lot of adoption and there are a lot of projects, for instance, leveraging this infrastructure, and they would probably not do this if there was no use of it, right? So it works. And this is probably the last and the most important part of it, that it's not just like some conceptual thing. It works and it's gaining adoption, and that's what is exciting, I think.
You mentioned that you're from Russia, but before we started recording, we were talking about where you're currently located, which is in Singapore. I always like to ask guests in different locations of the world how the local population thinks about crypto, what their attitude or perceptions of crypto are. Do you have a sense for what the people of Singapore think?
Yeah, I think I can compare. It would be interesting comparison between Russia and Singapore, for instance. So in Russia, I just went there a couple of months ago. It looks like people still haven't recovered from 2017, 2018, like ICO boom, etc. Because at that point there was quite a significant amount of fraud and like fake projects, etc. And people are just very reluctant to do anything with crypto, generally speaking. So for instance, we are trying to hire people across the world. And I noticed that in Russia, like when you're talking to a person and a candidate, he's like, okay, I'm interested in like fintech and AI, ML, etc., but not crypto, please, no crypto projects. So because probably there were a lot of projects also originating from Russia at that point, and they either like dissolved or closed their operations, etc. And people are generally sort of have some negative outlook of crypto at the moment in general, I think. In Singapore, it's absolutely different. So regulation is much more friendly than in Russia, where like crypto is generally speaking prohibited. It's illegal. In Singapore, it is legal. There are a lot of businesses related to crypto, starting from exchanges and also like infrastructure companies and financial companies and payment gateway companies related to crypto. So it looks very good here. I mean, in general, if you talk to people around, most of them are trading a little bit crypto, so they are not perceiving it as some weird thing. So it's already part of their lives. So let's say if you go in subway in Singapore, you can see some guy like looking at the phone and like checking prices of some coins and so on. So the outlook is generally much more positive. There are a lot of good businesses here that do things around crypto and in crypto as well. There is a quite significant ecosystem here of projects and people who contribute. There are big projects here that everybody knows about who are from Singapore, like Kyber Network, for instance, and others. So yeah, here it's a very good place, I think, in both a regulation perspective, because it's very, very friendly to crypto and it tries to regulate it in a reasonable fashion. And also from the community perspective, there's a lot of people who are genuinely interested. And the overall crowd is also quite positive, and they try to just at least trade a little bit. So whenever we talk to people here, they say, "Oh, I don't know much about crypto, but I have this app, and I trade a little bit, so it's interesting to me." So it's quite positive here, and there's no negative outlook of crypto in Singapore.
Eugene, part of the reason we're talking is you're with Chainstack, which has developed a relationship with the Graph. What can you tell me about what Chainstack is?
Chainstack is a managed blockchain services company. So we provide developers tools to build better with different blockchains like Ethereum and Polygon and Binance Smart Chain and a bunch of others. And we are basically a reliability layer for those who are building on top of blockchain, so that they don't worry about the node infrastructure, so that they can easily access various blockchains and they can read and write data to it, basically.
So the types of customers that Chainstack works with is just developers primarily?
Primarily developers, a lot of projects in the space of all sizes, from startups to so-called Web3 enterprises who are building very large dApps in DeFi or NFT space, as well as some of the smaller developers and traders, for instance. They also leverage a lot of Chainstack infrastructure because we are having distributed hosting facilities. And for instance, if there's a trader in Singapore, he would like to use, let's say, a Polygon node located in Singapore and not in US, and that's something that we provide. So I would say that the major group of customers that we have are developers of all kinds, as well as traders who also leverage the latency improvements if they use nodes located in particular facilities in particular locations.
And what is it that you do for Chainstack?
So I'm a co-founder and CTO here, and I'm doing everything related to product and engineering, basically. So I'm leading these teams in Chainstack, ensuring that we have the capabilities that our customers are asking for, as well as bringing the reliability necessary for this space to go securely in production and doesn't break, basically.
So can you remember when you first came up with the idea of Chainstack, and what did you see in the market as a potential problem you wanted to solve?
So we wanted to build a solution on Ethereum blockchain, and we built it. And part of this was to have a couple of Ethereum nodes running all the time. And that's where we started to see the potential of having a managed service on the market, because it was really hard at some point to run, sync, maintain, update Ethereum nodes. So we decided, okay, why don't we basically replicate the idea of managed services such as AWS and Google Cloud and other providers who basically give you Linux as a service to some extent, and you don't need to deal with hardware, you don't need to deal with operation system upgrades, etc., and you just use it, and it's very convenient. So we decided that we would go into this space as well, and we try to make this very simple to use, very intuitive to use, so that people do not need to deal with the complexities underneath the node APIs, and they can just use it as normal API.
The GRTIQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, This is GRTIQ. Thank you for listening to this podcast and for supporting this project, especially those of you who have taken the time to leave a review, rate the podcast, or share an episode on social media. The GRTIQ podcast shines a light on the people working to build the graph, and each week we get to meet a new member of the graph community to hear their story, to get a fresh perspective, and hopefully to learn something new. If you have the ambition to help build the graph, then take initiative and get involved. Join the Graph's Discord, start reading and contributing to posts in the Graph's forum, join the Graph's Telegram and Reddit channels, and look for ways to make a contribution. They're out there. If I can do it, so can you.
Thank you for your support.
Roger that.
So Eugene, as we mentioned before we started recording, I'm not a technical guy and I don't understand everything about the crypto or blockchain space. Can you help us understand a use case of how a developer or some of your other customers leverage Chainstack to accomplish what they want to get done?
Sure. So let's say there's a decentralized exchange, right? And they work on 5 different protocols. Let's say for simplicity's sake, the EVM-based protocols. So they run on Ethereum, Polygon, Binance Smart Chain, and a couple of other EVM-based chains, right? So what they need to do is they need to get the data from the blockchain all the time to understand, okay, what's the prices, what has been the transactions happening for a particular user on a particular address, et cetera, et cetera. They also need to send data to blockchain. So whenever a user comes, he creates a transaction, this transaction should be broadcasted and so on and so forth, right? So basically, blockchain technically is just a very, very big backend system, which is distributed, right? So it's similar to what you have in traditional like Web 2 software when you have a backend and front end, and backend is usually dependent on the application, and backend is hosted by a particular company that is running a service, right? And in blockchain case, basically the node that is processing the transactions, that is verifying the transactions, that is storing the data related to transactions is becoming this sort of like humongous backend system that you can read and write data from and to, right? So we provide easy access to this backend system. Otherwise, people would need to, in this particular use case scenario of a decentralized exchange, they would need to run like at least five different nodes of these protocols. They need to figure out how all this software works because each of the node clients are working slightly differently. They have some details and nuances in configuration and maintenance and so on and so forth. So you basically need a dedicated DevOps team to run all these nodes, make sure that they are up to date, make sure that whenever the transaction level is high, they stay up to sync. Whenever the ledger grows, you have necessary hardware to upgrade these nodes, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of steps in setting up these nodes as well as maintaining them. And as we all go multi-chain, this problem just becomes exponentially more complicated because you need to support other protocols as well. And they, again, are slightly different, and you cannot just copy-paste things in terms of automation and maintenance of these nodes as well. So this problem that we're solving, we basically allow you not to worry about this infrastructure and focus on building the application itself and focus on the business logic of the application rather than infrastructure for the corresponding chains that you want to support.
What would then be your long-term vision or objective with Chainstack?
Yeah, so we have strategy to do 2 things. First, we want to support all the popular chains that developers will be using and that will gain adoption. So this is a lot of work to do, and this is something quite similar to what the Graph is doing. For instance, they also want to support all the popular chains, index them, and provide access to the data from this chain. So for us, it's quite the same strategy. We want to support all the popular chains that developers are developing on, that users are using, so that for all this, there is a reliable infrastructure that anybody can use to access these chains, right? This is number 1. Number 2 is we want to provide the most complete developer experience all right? So that whenever you're building on a particular chain, you have all the tools necessary to have the complete experience, right? So infrastructure is one, and node APIs is one. Then you have a lot of things like custom APIs that are not provided by the node software themselves, and also things like custom SDKs for particular use cases, for instance, NFTs or DeFi, etc. So this is our second strategic direction. We want to provide as complete experience as possible for all these blockchains to build on, so that developers feel comfortable and they feel that there are all tools available for them to build their business scenarios that they want to deliver to the users.
So if listeners want to learn more about Chainstack, what's the best way to learn more about the services and see if maybe you can help them?
Sure. So we have a website that explains Chainstack quite well. And if you go to chainstack.com, you can get most of the information. We also have Discord and Telegram communities where you can jump in and just talk to us, talk to the team, talk to the people who are using Chainstack already and ask about it. So yeah, this would be probably the best ways to start learning about what we are doing.
Well, I want to encourage listeners that want to learn more about Chainstack and the services to visit chainstack.com. Eugene, I want to shift our discussion now towards the graph and ask you some questions about the partnership there, the grant that you received, and the work you've been doing. Before we get there, can you tell me when you first became aware of the graph and what your initial impressions were?
I think I learned about the graph around spring 2020. I think that was around the time the project was being open to public, and that was the time when the mission control testnet was about to launch. And at that point of time, it was clear that it's a very interesting project, but it was not obvious as today that it will become the core pillar of the Web3 infrastructure, at least to me. Of course, it was obvious to the team, I think, and to the more thoughtful people in the community at that point. For me, it was obvious that it's a very interesting project, and I would like to follow it, and I would like to participate in it. And we were sort of forced to participate in it when the mission control launched, because people were looking for archive Ethereum nodes everywhere. And we were one of the providers that were doing well here, and we were providing shared nodes, dedicated nodes. So if you want to run a small indexer operation, if you want to run a large indexer operation, we provided you these options. And also the platform was absolutely self-service, so anybody could come and deploy their own dedicated node. At that point of time, it was probably 4 terabytes of disk immediately, and it was available to you in like 10 minutes, and it was up to date. It was in sync with the chain, so it was pretty useful for the early indexer community. And we've basically seen an influx of new customers for this particular service around August 2020. And since then, it was kind of clear that we are essential part of this infrastructure stack, because you still need to have a node to run the graph APIs, because all this data needs to be indexed, and currently all the data is stored on chain and it's being served by the node. So since then, we've been following the graph very closely. We've been working with the graph very closely, and we're doing this until now as well.
So following then testnet and getting involved with some of the indexers needing the infrastructure to participate in the graph, you also evolved your own relationship between Chainstack and the graph. As I understand it, you became a graph grantee and did some work for the Graph Foundation. What was the work that you did?
So our major value proposition as a company is that everything that we do is highly automated. Hence, you can do some magical things like deploy an archive node in 10 minutes and have it ready. And whereas it would take a few months to sync it from scratch. So we have everything highly automated, and we wanted to help the graph with this, and in particular with the automation related to cloud native stacks, such as Kubernetes and Terraform and other things that are closely related to the cloud. because we are leveraging this stack a lot. So that was basically our proposal to package all the graph tools and all the graph services and all the graph components into a reusable, highly automated, almost one-click solution for the deployment of the indexer stack in different clouds. So that's something that we wanted to build, and that's what we eventually built with support of all public cloud providers such as AWS and Google Cloud and Azure.
So a lot of automation comes with Chainstack and the ability for participants in the ecosystem to get that automation benefit. How does tools like Streaming Fast's Firehose, for example, fit into what you've been able to do?
Right. For us, Streaming Fast's work would be sort of next frontier because they are extending the graph stack itself. So they're adding a few more components to it, as well as they are tuning the actual blockchain nodes so that they give the information necessary for the other Firehose components to index data in a more efficient manner. So for us, it would be a next big thing in the graph context, because we would be looking into introducing Firehose components into the automation that we've built previously, as well as looking into node hosting with Firehose enabled capabilities, right? So this is a twofold story for us, which will be quite substantial. And we are looking currently in both directions, improving the stack to add the necessary Firehose components, as well as hosting the nodes with Firehose enabled functionality.
Well, the work you've done with the Graph Foundation sounds very exciting. Where are you at in that process on delivering on your grant?
So we've recently posted a post on the Graph forum where we showcase the work, where we describe the objectives, how it works. There's also a link to our GitHub repository. So it's github.com/chainstack/graph automation. So we have it battle tested already by some of our partners, by some of our customers, and they really like the simplicity of this solution. So highly recommended to all indexers to go and check it out because it simplifies your life in terms of the deployment of new indexer stacks, as well as monitoring them and maintaining them. So highly recommended to go into the GitHub repo and checking out the work that we've done. This work will be a foundation for us to ultimately build tailored managed graph node service that many of our customers ask us about. So those who don't want to use the hosted service for some reason, or they just want to test their subgraphs and they don't have necessary knowledge to install all the stack components and so on, we are looking into building a managed graph node solution as well, in the same way as we have for other protocols, so that basically you can go on Chainstack and you can deploy your own graph indexer stack, and you can upload your subgraph and you can test it. You can use it in production as well, just as a separate subgraph. So highly recommended to check out the repo, create any issues at the moment, because this will be the foundation for the next step for us in terms of the services that we're providing as well.
Well, Eugene, it's all very exciting stuff. And it sounds like to me, any listener that's ever contemplated becoming an indexer, but maybe doesn't know the path forward, might be overwhelmed about some of the process of getting involved. Chainstack provides a door, a gateway into getting more involved. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we can help you with the node infrastructure itself, since you will need some node APIs, some archived node APIs for the protocols that you want to launch the DApp on. And we provide you the way to automate the indexer stack deployment. And further down the road, we will basically integrate all that in one solution so that you will be able to launch your own subgraphs on Chainstack and use them as normal APIs as well. So this will complement the hosted service from the graph, as well as the decentralized network. So basically, developers, they will have multiple options to use the graph, whether through hosted service provided from the graph, hosted service provided from Chainstack, or using decentralized network directly if they are also willing to do so. So there will be multiple options for different use cases, for different scenarios, and that's how we envision this ecosystem moving forward.
Thank you for sharing all that, Eugene, and appreciate for sure the work that you've done for the Graph Foundation, and very excited as I look over the website here, all the great things that Chainstack is doing. What's next for you then? And what's kind of the next big milepost for you?
So for us, there are a few core pillars that we are working on at the moment. So one, and the most important one, is of course the reliability of our service, because we see more and more in production use cases for Web3 apps, and the adoption is growing in a crazy fashion. So we want to enhance the reliability of the overall platform, because this is our major value proposition. We are kind of the hidden layer of Web3, and to some extent similar to the graph, because the APIs that we provide, they just should work. And ideally, people should not just ever come to us with any issues or problems, and they just should plug in the API in their apps, and it should just work. So for us, we will always invest our time and resources into reliability of the overall platform. Apart from that, for us, next thing is, again, very aligned with the graph strategy, supporting more protocols that are either popular already or that are gaining traction. So there will be a lot of news on that in the next 3 to 6 months. So please follow us on Twitter. Please subscribe to our newsletter. There will be a lot of exciting announcements soon.
Well, as I've referenced many times during the interview, you've got this great computer science background and a lot of experience in tech and in the crypto space. But because of what Chainstack does, you also work a lot with developers. So you have a sense of what developers need and what the demand is in that segment of the market. And as most listeners know, developers can really benefit from the graph in building decentralized apps. And so I'd like to know your perspective of that fit between the graph and developers building dApps. How important is a solution like the graph to the work that they're trying to do?
Well, as we all participate in the community of the graph, and we follow like the discussions, for instance, in Discord. If you go to, let's say, hosted service channel, you would see that anytime there is some sort of downtime of a hosted service, you would see a lot of people say, oh, my subgraph doesn't index and all my users are complaining, etc. So you can clearly see that there's not just demand for the graph services and tools, but also it's now being used in production for a lot of applications, and became a very natural and very key service to those who are building dApps, right? So I think it's not the only tool that you need to build a complete dApp, but it's extremely critical today because it provides you easy access to blockchain data, which is more high performant, which is more optimized, rather than getting all this information directly from the node, for instance. So having said that, you might still need a node when you are building a dApp and when you're running a dApp operations, because, for instance, you need to send transactions, you need to get certain information directly from the blockchain. But for reading the information from the blockchain in the context of your particular dApp, which is indexed for your particular use case, I think there is a no-brainer, and the graph, subgraphs, has been an essential component. As of today, I think it would be hard to imagine some of the dApps without the graph APIs built in.
Earlier, you talked about the recent news the graph has announced coming out of Lisbon and a lot of different events, integrations with Cosmos, Near, Solana. What do those types of announcements mean for listeners that may not fully understand the crypto space and how important this news is? What's the significance of it?
I think that what Graph enabled for Ethereum at some point is really simplified way of accessing data on the blockchain, and not only simplified, but also more high performant, which I'm sure boosted a lot the work that many teams have been doing with their dApps, which means that they could ship faster and they could provide better service for their users. And for these protocols that are being supported right now, it means that the developer experience, again, can be boosted dramatically, because you could use the graph APIs and you could build your own subgraphs to access the data in much more efficient fashion that you did before when, for instance, you access the node directly. So in short, it will enhance the development experience as well as speed for these new protocols that are being adopted. What is also super important here, I think that the graph is laying a foundation for Web3 APIs, which means that if you build on Ethereum today with the graph and it's being a critical part of your stack, when you want to build something on Solana, for instance, it would not be such a big learning curve for you because you've been using pretty much the same type of tools on the other protocol, which is very, very important from developer perspective, so that you don't need to learn all the things from scratch right away. So this is very important, I think, this standardization of tooling across different protocols, not only EVM-based chains, but also non-EVM-based chains. And that's very aligned with what we've been thinking about in like 2018 when we created Chainstack, that standardization will be extremely important in this space, regardless the chain you are building. And we've been building our product with exactly this idea in mind, that the user experience for all the blockchains should be very, very similar, so that people do not feel frustrated when they move from one chain to another.
Hi, this is Eugene Aseev with Chainstech, and we are a node provider at the Graph community. If my conversation with the GRTIQ podcast has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTIQ.
Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
When you think about the future and the blockchains that exist now and what we might expect in terms of growth, do you envision a future where there's many, many different types of blockchains, or does at some point it get a little more formatted and things start to look the same?
It's a great question. Of course, very speculative. So I think that there will be more protocols at some point, and there will be a lot of adoption for a lot of protocols, but later they would either merge or they would either standardize more, such as you don't really know which protocol you're using to some extent, and then you're just using some DApp, and then it routes things automatically for you underneath. So something like that will happen, I think, because as you see today, as a like hardcore DApp user, you probably need to deal with at least like 5 to 10 different blockchains. You need to manage accounts here and there. Sometimes they are standardized through tools like Ledger or MetaMask because it's EVM-based chain. Sometimes you have to use another type of wallet, which makes it, I think, a little complicated. And we, as, let's say, traditional finance users, we don't have like 10 bank accounts. Generally speaking, we might have like 1 or 2 or maybe 3, but not 10, because you just simply would not use 10 different applications to manage your finance because it's too much of an overhead. So I think that at some point it will start being more standardized, either in a way of merging different protocols and being like larger protocols, or just hiding all this protocol complexity and details and nuances underneath the DApp, like front end to some extent, right? So we would not really know which protocol we're using, either it's Solana or Ethereum. We would just use some DApp, and there will be some sort of universal wallet that we're going to use. And we just say, okay, please connect my universal wallet to this universal DApp, and then it will do the work. And then we will not know which protocol is being used, being routed to, etc. So that's how I think. And I would like to see it as well, because even today it's a little complex. So you need to switch your networks, and you need to learn about different advantages of why Avalanche is better than Phantom, better than Solana, and maybe worse than like Near, etc. So it's a little bit complicated. For sure, it's not a good go-to-market strategy for the mainstream market, because mainstream users, they would not like to learn about 10 different protocols and advantages of each of them. So they would just like to install some universal thing and just interact with some service that is giving them some value. So I think that's how it will evolve, and that's how I would like to see it evolve. And again, for instance, the graph is providing a great foundation here, because if you want a DApp to support like 10 different protocols, using the graph would be a no-brainer because you would just use the set of APIs for all these protocols to get data in a standardized fashion.
Building on that question, then, what is your long-term vision for the impact that Web3, blockchain, crypto can have in the world?
I think that it will be definitely changing the way we are dealing with the internet for sure in long term. How it's really interesting, and it's one of the motivations, I think, for most of the people to be in the space and to be building in this space, because it's kind of unclear how it will evolve and how it will look like in 20 years. I think, honestly speaking, it will look absolutely differently to what people are thinking. Most of the people are thinking how it will look like in 20 years. And I think the primitives that are now being built are super powerful, and they enable various things. Like, for instance, recent Vitalik's post about crypto cities is very interesting, and there have been some development in this space as well, and it's directly related to DAOs as well, right? So I think, in my opinion, the most impactful thing on us would be the decentralized organizations, because generally speaking, everything in the world is being moved by some sort of organization. Today, there are like enterprises, businesses registered in a certain fashion in certain countries with certain legislation. And of course, there are a lot of limitations to that. And what DAOs open up, I think, is absolutely democratized way of participating in different organizations, bringing value to these organizations. So I think that in very long term, this is something that will completely change the way things are done in the world, because of the power of decentralized organizations in particular. Of course, things like DeFi will change the way we interact with financial services as well. But I think that if I want to choose just one concept out of crypto that will bring the most impact, I think that would be decentralized organizations for sure, because there are like infinite number of scenarios and use cases how they can be used to improve the current like governance of organizations, governments, etc.
How does the graph fit into that vision? If crypto Web3 has the impact on the world and on the future that so many people are hopeful about, how do you envision the graph's role in all of that?
I think that the outlook of graph as sort of Google in the world of blockchains makes a lot of sense, because that's essentially what the graph is doing. They're trying to index all the data on all the blockchains and provide an easy way to basically get the information from all the blockchains. So I think that makes a lot of sense to perceive graph as a sort of search engine or like indexing engine in the world of blockchains and decentralized networks. What is also related to my previous talk around DAOs, what I really like about the graph is that they are pushing really hard the decentralization aspect of the network, right? So which some of the projects they don't really do, and they compensate with other things, and they say, okay, we'll be decentralized later on. And that's something that the graph is doing, I think, really well. And I think it's really hard to do as well. And it's really hard problem to solve. Like how do you build the stack in such a way that it's decentralized by design, and that it's managed in a decentralized fashion, and then the services are also provisioned in a decentralized fashion, such as you have communities with the indexers, curators, etc. I think it's really hard problem to solve, and I think like guys in the graph team, they've done a lot of work and a lot of hard work here, and this is critically important in the long term. Because this will be part of the overall kind of new world with decentralized organizations being like the primary way of doing things. And I think the graph are actually one of the first companies in this space who are doing things persistently right. And they're being very principled about being decentralized and about providing services in a decentralized fashion. So I think maybe at some point, this will somehow submerge so that the graph will play some role in the decentralized organization field as well to some extent, because they are actually one of the first protocols who did it persistently and consistently right in terms of decentralization. So this is kind of very large experiment of how to build a decentralized system without compromising all the time. So this is a very good use case for the decentralized system building in general, I think.
Eugene, you've been so generous with your time and have provided such thoughtful answers. If listeners want to follow or learn more about you, what's the best way to stay in touch?
So basically, we have this Discord and Twitter and Telegram channels where we communicate from Chainstack. You can also follow me in Twitter. I'm not a very persistent social media author, but I do some tweets from time to time. So please follow me there. And apart from that, really happy to chat in various Discords. Today, people hang out in crypto, mostly in Discords. I have probably 30 or more servers open, including the Graph Discord as well. So we'll be happy to chat about particular topics on different protocols in this Discord. So you can easily find me there by searching for Eugene Chainstack.
This has been a production of the GRT IQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRT IQ
Podcast. Roger that.